Grief does strange things to time. It stretches mornings until they ache and collapses nights into something you barely remember surviving. 3 months after my wife died, the house still smelled like her shampoo in the hallway bathroom, and every room felt one chair too empty. I am 64 years old. I have money in the bank, a house that's paid for, and a silence that presses on my chest harder than any debt ever could. People assume comfort comes from security. They're wrong. Comfort comes from being needed. 10 days before my wife passed, when the doctors had already started using softer voices, she asked me to sit on the edge of her hospital bed. Her hands were thin, but her eyes were clear in a way that scared me. "I got you something," she said. I laughed because it felt absurd. "You don't need to get me anything." She smiled like she knew something I didn't. "You're going to need him." Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. The puppy came home the next day. A German shepherd, all paws and clumsy courage, ears too big for his head. She made me promise I'd keep him close, that I wouldn't give him away when things got hard, that I'd let him sleep near me if the nights got too quiet. After she was gone, that dog became the reason I got out of bed. I named him after a word my wife used to say when she meant keep going. He followed me from room to room, tripped over his own feet, slept pressed against my leg like he was afraid I might disappear too. When the grief felt unbearable, I'd sit on the floor and let him climb into my lap, licking my face like he was offended by sadness itself. My son visited often in those first weeks. He meant well, I know that. His wife came with him. She hugged me longer than necessary, asked too many questions about my finances, and told me I needed to think about the future, about simplifying things. "You shouldn't be alone," she said. "This house is too big for one person." I smiled and nodded and changed the subject. I wasn't ready to talk about selling anything, especially not the place my wife loved. At first, the puppy's sickness seemed random. He stopped eating for a day. Then he vomited. Then he bounced back like nothing happened. The vet said puppies get into things. Curious stomachs, developing immune systems. I believed it because I needed to. Then it happened again, and again. Each time it followed a visit. My son and his wife would come over for dinner. She'd bring dessert, insist on helping in the kitchen, bend down to pet the puppy with a voice that sounded sweet enough to trust. 2 days later, he'd be listless, weak, his eyes dull. I told myself I was imagining patterns because grief makes you paranoid. I told myself I was looking for control where none existed, until the night I woke up to him whimpering. He couldn't stand. His breathing was shallow, ribs moving too fast for such a small body. I held him in my arms on the kitchen floor while my hands shook, begging him to be okay, promising him things I couldn't guarantee. The emergency vet stabilized him. They asked questions, food changes, household chemicals, plants. I answered everything honestly. I went home feeling hollow and angry at myself for not protecting the one thing that still trusted me completely. After that, I started paying attention, not with suspicion, with quiet observation. I noticed how my daughter-in-law always volunteered to refill his water bowl, how she brought special treats she said were good for training, how she'd insist on feeding him herself, laughing when he wagged his tail like he'd won the lottery. I noticed how she'd watch me when I wasn't watching her. The next time they visited, I didn't say anything. I didn't accuse. I didn't hover. I just waited. 2 days later, the puppy was sick again. This time, something inside me went still instead of panicking. A calm I hadn't felt since before my wife died. Grief teaches you when to stop denying what's in front of you. I called the vet and asked a different set of questions. About toxins, about slow exposure, about substances that wouldn't show up right away. Then I bought cameras, small ones, discreet, hidden in corners where no one looks unless they know what they're searching for. I didn't tell my son. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself I was being careful, not cruel. I told myself I'd rather be wrong than broken. The next visit came sooner than expected. Dinner, smiles, concerned looks at how tired I seemed. She bent down to pet the puppy, her hand disappearing just out of view of the kitchen counter. I watched later, alone, in the dark, and that's when I saw it. Not a mistake, not an accident, a choice. The moment I realized someone was willing to kill the last gift my wife gave me just to make me surrender. I thought losing my wife was the worst pain I'd ever survive. But what I discovered on that footage changed everything I thought I knew about my family. I watched the footage 3 times before I could breathe normally again. The first time, I didn't understand what I was seeing. My mind rejected it the way the body rejects poison. The second time, I hoped I was wrong, that maybe the angle was misleading, that maybe grief had finally cracked something inside me. By the third time, denial was no longer an option. The camera above the kitchen counter caught everything clearly. Her movements were smooth, unhurried, comfortable. She bent down, scooped the puppy into her arms like a doting aunt, kissed the top of his head. Then her hand slipped into her pocket. She pinched something small between her fingers and dropped it into his water bowl. She stirred it with one finger. Then she smiled. I sat in my chair long after the screen went dark, the house silent except for the puppy's breathing at my feet. He was asleep, exhausted, his body rising and falling like he was already tired of fighting. My hands were steady. That scared me more than the anger. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall. I didn't call my son. Grief had already burned through the part of me that reacted quickly. What was left understood one thing very clearly. She wasn't trying to kill the dog quickly. She was trying to kill me slowly. The puppy was just the lever. I took him to the vet the next morning. A different one this time. I brought the footage. I didn't accuse. I just asked questions and showed evidence. They ran tests they hadn't run before. Deeper ones. The kind you only do when something doesn't feel right. When the results came back, the vet didn't meet my eyes at first. "There's a toxin," she said carefully. "Low dose, repeated exposure, enough to weaken him over time, enough to make him dependent on medical care, enough to break your heart." "Would it kill him?" I asked. She hesitated. "Eventually." I nodded once. That night I sat on the floor and fed the puppy by hand. I told him stories he couldn't understand, about his mother, about the woman who picked him out knowing I'd need something to protect me from the silence. He licked my fingers weakly and wagged his tail like he was proud of himself for still being here. I promised him I wouldn't let anyone hurt him again. I didn't know then how heavy that promise would become. The next visit came a week later. They arrived with concern painted carefully onto their faces. My son hugged me. His wife touched my arm, asked how I was holding up, said she was worried about my decision-making lately. "I just want what's best for you," she said. "You've been through so much." I smiled back. I served dinner. I watched. I waited. She didn't touch the water bowl this time. She was learning. Instead, she offered to give the puppy a treat. One she brought herself. Wrapped. Branded. Something that looked harmless enough to trust. I said no. The word landed heavier than I expected. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Irritation buried under patience. "Oh," she said lightly. "I was just trying to help." "I know," I replied. "But I'm being careful now." The puppy survived that visit. Barely. 2 nights later, he collapsed again. This time, he didn't come back. He died in my arms on the kitchen floor, the same place I had begged him to stay alive before. His body went still so quietly it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I didn't cry at first. I wrapped him in my wife's old blanket and sat beside him until morning. When the sun came up, something inside me went numb and stayed that way. The funeral for a dog is a lonely thing. People don't show up. They don't send flowers. They tell you it was just an animal. But that puppy was the last promise my wife ever made to me, and someone had murdered him with intent. The paperwork came next. My son sat across from me at the table, eyes red, voice shaking. He told me he was worried about me, that his wife thought it would be best if they handled things for a while. The house, the accounts, the responsibilities. I signed, not because I believed them, because I wanted to see how far she would go once she thought she'd won. I handed over the house, the accounts, the control, and I watched her relax for the first time since my wife died. She thought she had broken me. What she didn't know was that grief had already taken everything she thought she was stealing. What remained was patience. And patience remembers. She believed killing my puppy had ended the fight, but that was only because she didn't know I had already decided to let her think she'd won. Signing my name felt like pressing my thumb into wet cement. Every stroke of the pen carried the weight of my wife's laugh in the kitchen, the puppy's clumsy paws on hardwood, the life I had built with my own hands. I didn't rush it. I didn't tremble. I signed slowly, deliberately, like I wanted every letter to remember me. My son watched the page. His wife watched my face. That told me everything. She thanked me. Actually thanked me. Said it was the right thing and that I was being so responsible. She talked about relief, about stability, about how much easier things would be now that decisions were off my shoulders. I nodded. I let her talk. People reveal themselves most when they think the story is over. They moved fast after that. Contractors, appointments, conversations in hushed tones that stopped when I entered the room. My son tried to be gentle with me, but gentleness is just another way to keep someone quiet. I let them. I moved into the guest room. I let boxes disappear from the garage. I let her suggest selling things that held memories. I let her rewrite my life as if it had already ended. At night, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the empty floor where the puppy used to sleep. The silence hurt, but it also sharpened something in me. Grief had burned away distraction. What was left was focus. I started keeping a journal again. Dates, times, who visited, what they brought, what changed afterward. Patterns don't lie when you stop arguing with them. I copied the footage, more than once, to different places. I emailed it to myself under a name no one would recognize. I printed still frames and sealed them in envelopes. Grief taught me redundancy. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I waited. The first mistake she made was assuming my silence meant confusion. The second was assuming my son wouldn't talk to me if she told him not to. He came by one afternoon alone. He looked thinner, tired, like someone who had traded sleep for peace and lost both. "She says you're doing better," he told me. That signing everything lifted a weight. I nodded. "It did." He frowned. "You don't sound like you mean that." I didn't answer right away. I poured him coffee. The same mugs his mother used to line up every Sunday morning. Muscle memory is a powerful thing. "Did you know the puppy was poisoned?" I asked quietly. He went still. "What?" "Low dose, repeated exposure," I said. "Not enough to raise alarms right away, enough to weaken him over time." "That's not possible," he said too fast. "She loved that dog. She loved the leverage," I replied. He stood up. "This isn't fair. You're grieving. You're looking for someone to blame." I slid one envelope across the table. He didn't touch it. "I didn't blame anyone," I said. I watched. He stared at the envelope like it might explode. "I don't want to see it," he said. "That's the difference between you and me," I replied. "I didn't want to either." He left angry, hurt, confused. 3 days later, he came back. He didn't knock. His eyes were red. His hands shook. "She said you're lying," he whispered. "She said you're trying to punish her because you never liked her." I didn't argue. I handed him the tablet. I didn't watch his face while the footage played. I listened instead. The sharp intake of breath, the quiet sound someone makes when the ground drops out beneath them. When it ended, he sat there like gravity had doubled. "She said she was helping," he muttered. "She said the dog was sick because you couldn't take care of him anymore." I nodded. "That was the plan." He looked at me then, really looked. "Why didn't you stop her?" "I did," I said. "I just didn't do it loudly. The truth is, I needed him to see it himself. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because denial is stronger than evidence when love is involved. He needed to break free of the story she told him before he could hear mine. He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him the truth. "I want the truth documented," I said. "I want what was taken returned, and I want everyone who smiled while they did it to understand exactly why they lost." He swallowed. "And her?" I thought of the puppy's body going still, of my wife's last gift, of the way she smiled when she thought I was finished. "Her," I said. "I want her to be seen." That night I moved the last piece into place. I scheduled an appointment. Not with a lawyer first, with witnesses. She believed everything was settled. But the moment my son asked me who else needed to see the footage, I knew the story was about to change. The meeting took place in a room that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. Nothing dramatic. No heavy oak desks or raised voices. Just a long table, a pot of coffee, and the quiet weight of consequence. My son sat beside me. He hadn't slept. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged and the way he kept rubbing his hands together like he was trying to scrub something off his skin. Across from us sat the attorney I had chosen and a notary who barely looked up from her documents. My daughter-in-law arrived last. She entered the room with the same confidence she'd worn since the day I signed everything over. Calm smile, controlled posture. A woman who believed the future had already been decided in her favor. She greeted the attorney. She greeted the notary. She did not greet me. That was mistake number 3. "This shouldn't take long," she said, settling into her chair. "We're just formalizing what's already been agreed to." The attorney nodded politely. "Before we proceed, there are a few clarifications we need to address." She glanced at my son. He didn't meet her eyes. Her smile tightened. I folded my hands on the table. I felt steady. That surprised me. Grief had finally transformed into something usable. The attorney slid a document across the table. This transfer was executed while Mr. Reyes was under emotional distress following a recent bereavement. That alone invites review. She scoffed. He was competent. He signed willingly. "I did," I said. "I just didn't do it blindly." Her head snapped toward me. The attorney continued. "In addition, we have reason to believe there was coercion involved." She laughed once. Sharp. "That's absurd." I reached into my bag and placed the tablet on the table. I didn't turn it on yet. "I want you to understand something," I said calmly. "I didn't install cameras because I wanted revenge. I installed them because I wanted the truth." My son finally spoke. "You lied to me." She stared at him. "About what?" "About the dog." The word landed like glass breaking. She inhaled, slowly. "This again?" I pressed play. No sound at first, just the image. Her kneeling, her hand slipping into her pocket. The careful, practiced motion. The stirring. The smile. The room went silent. The attorney didn't look away. The notary stopped writing. My son covered his mouth. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly across the floor. "This is edited," she snapped. "You can't prove anything from a video angle." "I can," the attorney said quietly, "because this isn't the only evidence." I slid the vet reports across the table. The toxin results, the timeline, the pattern of exposure. Her face changed then. Not panic. Calculation. "You have no idea how much pressure I was under," she said. "You don't know what I was trying to protect." "Your inheritance," my son said hoarsely. She turned on him. "Our future." "No," he said. "Yours." The attorney cleared his throat. "Based on what we've seen, the property transfer will be reversed. Additionally, we are obligated to report suspected animal cruelty and financial exploitation." Her voice dropped. "You wouldn't." "I would," I said. "And I am." She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as an obstacle, not as a resource, but as something she hadn't accounted for. A man who had already survived the worst thing imaginable. The meeting ended quickly after that. There was no screaming, no dramatic exit. Just paperwork being gathered back into folders and the sound of a plan collapsing in real time. Outside, my son leaned against the wall like his legs had forgotten how to hold him. "I didn't want to believe it," he said. "I kept telling myself you were wrong." "I know," I replied. "I didn't need you to believe me right away. I needed you to be ready when the truth showed up." He nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we let the truth finish its work." The following weeks were quiet in a way that felt earned. The house felt like mine again. Not because the furniture hadn't moved, but because the air had changed. Neighbors found out. Not from gossip, but from process. From official inquiries, from people asking careful questions. She didn't come back to the house. My son stayed. Not out of obligation, but because he wanted to relearn what trust looked like without someone whispering in his ear. One afternoon, he asked me if I regretted anything. I thought of the puppy, of his warm weight against my leg, of how love can still be a weapon if you let it be used that way. "I regret that I didn't recognize cruelty sooner," I said. "But I don't regret loving something deeply enough to fight for it." He nodded. "Neither do I." There was one thing left to do. Not for revenge, for closure. I scheduled one final meeting, and this time it wasn't private. She thought the worst was over, but the final reckoning wasn't happening behind closed doors anymore. The room was larger this time, brighter. Glass walls instead of closed doors. A place designed so nothing important could hide in the shadows. I arrived early. Old habit. I sat near the window and watched people pass outside, each of them carrying something private, something invisible to everyone else. Grief teaches you how common secrets really are. My son arrived a few minutes later. He looked steadier than he had in weeks, though there was still a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there before all of this. Some lines don't fade quickly. They carve. She came last again, but this time she didn't glide in like she owned the floor. She hesitated at the door. The attorney had insisted on witnesses. Not a spectacle, just presence. A representative from animal welfare, a financial auditor, a mediator. People whose job was to remember accurately. She sat across from me. She didn't look at my son. "I don't see why this needs to be public," she said. "Everything important has already been decided." "That's not true," the mediator replied calmly. "What's been decided privately still has consequences." I watched her hands. They were clasped too tightly, white at the knuckles. A body tells the truth long before the mouth catches up. The animal welfare officer spoke first. He described the findings plainly. Repeated exposure, deliberate administration, patterned timing, intent inferred by behavior, not speculation. She interrupted once, then twice. Finally, the mediator raised a hand. "You'll have time to respond." When it was her turn, she didn't cry. She explained. Pressure, fear, uncertainty. She said she felt trapped. She said she believed the dog was already sick. She said she only wanted to scare me, not kill anything. Not kill anything. I felt my chest tighten, but my voice stayed level. "You poisoned a living creature because you believed my grief made me manageable," I said. "You mistook love for weakness." She looked at me then. Really looked. There was anger there, and something else. Resentment. "You would have given us everything eventually," she said. "You just needed a push." That was the moment the room shifted. The mediator leaned back. The officer wrote something down. My son closed his eyes. The auditor slid a report across the table. "We've reviewed the financial transfers. Given the circumstances, restitution is required. Additionally, misrepresentation during the transfer process carries penalties." She stared at the paper. Her confidence drained quietly like water leaking from a cracked vessel. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. "I did," I replied, "because you didn't stop when you had the chance." The meeting ended without shouting, without drama, just decisions made and recorded, the kind that follow you home and sit with you in silence. Outside, my son stood beside me in the sunlight. "I don't know how to forgive this," he said. "You don't have to today," I replied. "Forgiveness isn't a requirement, honesty is." He nodded. Over the next days, the truth traveled faster than gossip ever could. Not whispered, confirmed. People asked careful questions, then fewer questions, then none at all. She lost more than money, she lost credibility. The people who once nodded along with her stories stopped calling. Doors closed quietly. Invitations disappeared, the kind of isolation you earn. My son moved out, not in anger, in clarity. "I need to figure out who I am without someone steering me," he said. "I understand," I told him, and I meant it. The house grew quieter again, but this time the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like rest. One afternoon I visited the place where I buried the puppy, a corner of the yard beneath the tree my wife loved. I sat on the grass and told him everything that had happened since he left, how he mattered, how he changed the direction of my life without ever knowing it. I didn't feel anger there. I felt resolve. Later that evening I received one last message from her, short, controlled. "You didn't have to ruin my life." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I didn't," I typed. "I stopped you from ruining mine." I turned the phone off. There was one thing left unfinished, not a confrontation, not a punishment, a decision. What to do with the future I had almost handed away because someone believed grief made me small. I stood in the doorway of the room where the puppy used to sleep and realized something important. I wasn't broken anymore. I was free to choose what came next. I thought exposing the truth would bring closure, but what I chose to do afterward changed my life more than the betrayal ever did. Freedom is a strange thing when you first get it back. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with relief or celebration. It sits quietly and waits to see what you'll do with it. The morning after everything was finalized, I woke before sunrise. The house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window where the puppy used to sit, watching birds like they owed him an explanation. I didn't cry. Grief had already taught me that tears aren't always the currency of healing. Later that week, my son came by to help me go through the last of the boxes his wife had packed. We worked in silence for a while, handing each other things without comment. Old receipts, a cracked picture frame, tools I hadn't used since my wife was still alive. He finally broke the quiet. "I don't know how I didn't see it," he said. "You saw what you were ready to see," I replied. "That's not a failure. It's human." He nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about the dog." "So do I," said. That's how I know he mattered. We carried the final box to the garage. When it was empty, my son stood there with his hands in his pockets, unsure of where to put himself. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he said, "but I want to earn it. That takes time," I told him. "Luckily, we have some now." He smiled faintly at that. After he left, I drove to the shelter. It wasn't a decision made out of loneliness or replacement. It was made out of intention. I walked through rows of kennels, past dogs who barked and dogs who didn't, past stories written in eyes that had learned disappointment early. Then I saw him, a German Shepherd mix, older than a puppy, scar on one ear, calm, watching instead of pleading. I sat on the floor outside his kennel and waited. He walked over, sat down, pressed his forehead gently against the bars. That was enough. I didn't bring him home that day. I filled out the paperwork and told them I'd be back after the weekend. Some commitments deserve space to breathe. On the way home, I stopped at the cemetery. I stood beside my wife's grave and told her everything. About the betrayal, about the cameras, about the way patience had saved me when anger would have destroyed me. "I kept going," I said quietly, "just like you told me to." The wind moved through the trees. I didn't need a sign. I just needed the saying. The final legal notices arrived the following month. The property was fully restored, accounts secured, protections in place that couldn't be undone by charm or manipulation. Quiet justice. Thorough. Final. The public part resolved itself without spectacle. People learned what they needed to learn, not through gossip, but through consequence. Doors closed, invitations stopped, stories corrected themselves. I didn't watch from the sidelines. I moved on. The dog came home on a Tuesday morning. He walked through the front door like he'd been there before, sniffed every corner, then settled near my chair like he'd decided that was his place. The house exhaled. Healing didn't erase the past. It rearranged it. Some nights I still reach down expecting to feel a small, clumsy body press against my leg. When I don't, it hurts, but not the way it used to. It hurts like memory, not like injury. I planted a small marker under the tree in the yard. Nothing dramatic. Just a reminder that love can be targeted and still matter. That cruelty doesn't get the last word if you're willing to wait and watch and act when the truth is clear. People ask me now how I stayed calm, how I didn't explode, how I didn't lose myself. The answer is simple. I already had. Grief had stripped me down to what couldn't be taken. Everything else was just noise. I learned that patience is not weakness. That love doesn't make you blind, it makes you observant. And that sometimes the thing meant to break you becomes the reason you stand back up. I didn't win because I was smarter or stronger. I won because I didn't stop paying attention, and because I remembered who I was before someone decided to test me. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.